Hey, Nicole, good to be with you. Well, we should let you know that the president just issued a new statement that I think is notable given some of the conversation that you've just been having about maybe some of the items that were left out of his remarks, but that are all the more relevant. He did just say that any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Thank you, Donald J. Trump. So when we talk about where this goes from here, the potential future implications and what it could mean for U.S. military personnel stationed in the region and around the world, or for potentially whatever could be at risk here domestically, and however Iran chooses to respond to this, the president trying to emphasize that point with his messaging on social media tonight. And we've been talking about this, and I've been talking to my sources about this, Nicole, this idea of how this is all going to reverberate politically. We're seeing one of the first calls for potential impeachment from a member of Congress, someone who has been a very outspoken critic of this president, from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she wrote in a statement tonight that the president's, quote, disastrous decision to bomb Iran without authorization is a grave violation of the Constitution and congressional war powers. He has impulsively risked launching a war that may ensnare us for generations. And again, she says it's absolutely and clearly grounds for impeachment, and that she would have more soon to share. So that's a question now, too, for lawmakers. And given your conversation just now with Congressman Ro Khanna, one that I think will be put to a bunch of people now about whether this is something that they could go and pursue in Congress. Again, as a reminder to our viewers, in his first term, President Trump was faced with impeachment twice. So the question of whether this would happen again in a third term is an open one. But this idea of whether he was in his authority or not to do this is certainly one that, again, politically will be played out and debated among his supporters and among those in the halls of Congress. But overall, I think, Nicole, remember that in just a couple of days, the president is supposed to be heading to the NATO summit overseas. He was at the G7 a couple of days ago. He cut that short. He left early to return to Washington to monitor the situation in the Middle East. So the other major question that we're going to be pushing our sources on is how this plays on the world stage and with world leaders. And we know there had been a major push for diplomacy as recently as yesterday, when those European officials were huddling with Iranian officials, and where our own Andrea Mitchell was speaking with the Iranian foreign minister to try to see if that opportunity could yield anything. And now that's, of course, the major question, too. I'm told by a senior White House official that the president does believe there could be a window here to resume some of these talks, but there are plenty of others who have expressed a lot of doubt over that, of course, given how volatile this is now that the U.S. has entered this war between Israel and Iran. Nicole.
Monica, there's nothing normal about the way foreign policy seems to have been hatched here, but one of the things that a White House sometimes does is call in the press. Do you have any sense that some of the White House's closest allies in the press, people who have turned on this president over this issue, people like Tucker Carlson, were brought in tonight or touched with a plea to either stop with the attacks or mute their criticism?
Well, it's a good question, and we know in the last couple of days there certainly have been questions to the president about that. We know he was following, for instance, the heated conversation between Senator Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson pretty closely. But one of the first calls that he made after these strikes had concluded, we understand, was to Sean Hannity of Fox News, who led one of his hours with that, and saying that he had just spoken to the president about this, and who had a really broad message and sort of laid out the narrative for taking this military action before the president really had an opportunity to. So I think that this is a White House that it was thinking about that, but this is also a president who often calls up his own allies, and certainly those at Fox News that he is still quite close with a lot of frequency, because he knows that's how he can get to his audience and to his supporters fairly quickly. But to your question about how this might be communicated, he spoke with a couple of other high-profile anchors. He, of course, spoke briefly with our own colleague, moderator of Meet the Press, Kristen Welker, this evening. This is a president who they certainly do think about maybe the communication strategy, but he is the communication strategy. He decides what he wants to share, how he wants to share it, who he wants to share it with. And I think tomorrow will be a really key window into how some of these Republican divides over this military action will play out, and how he will have to continue to try to make the case for why he did it and continually defend it in a way that even just a couple of days ago, a week ago, his own Secretary of State, some of his top officials were saying this is not for the U.S. to get involved in, that the U.S. will continue to help Israel defend itself, but that this would not be something where the U.S. would be plunged into further military entanglement overseas, something, of course, that we know Donald Trump as a candidate said he pledged not to do, that he pledged to be a peacemaker. But he has also continually said, and this is what his allies have tried to amplify, that he believes he can bring forth peace through great strength. And I think that's what you're going to continue to hear them point to and argue and have to continue to defend, of course. Nicole.
Monica, thank you so much for being part of our coverage tonight.